Αγαπητοί φίλοι, η μέρα μνήμης σήμερα του εθνικού μας ποιητή Διονυσίου Σολομού και η μέρα γιορτής, Παγκόσμια ημέρα της ελληνικής γλώσσας, της γλώσσας των προγόνων μας, της δικής μας, του λαού και του έθνους μας. Μιας γλώσσας που όσο και αν φαινομενικά δεν είναι η πλέον διαδεδομένη σήμερα, αποτελεί το κυρίαρχο στοιχείο του σύγχρονου πολιτισμού. Η ελληνική γλώσσα είχε διάλειπτη ζωντανή παρουσία αιώνων, 40 αιώνες προφορικής και 25 γραπτής παράδοσης. Σε αυτούς τους 25 αιώνες γραπτής παράδοσης δεν υπάρχει ούτε ένας που να μην γράφτηκε ποίηση στην ελληνική γλώσσα, είχε πει ο Οδυσσέας Ελίτης. Μία ενιαία, αξεχώριστη υπάρχει η γλώσσα μας, στον χώρο και τον χρόνο. Ένας οργανισμός που ζει, εξελίσσεται, αναπτύσσεται μέσα από την κλασική γραμματεία, τα θρησκευτικά κείμενα, την επιστημονική ορολογία, τις τοπικές διαλέκτους, την καθημερινή επικοινωνία. Αυτή η γλώσσα που μας έδωσαν ελληνικοί στις αμμουδιές του Ομήρου χαρακτηρίζεται από μουσικότητα, πλαστικότητα, μέτρο, ακρίβεια, σαφήνεια, ομορφιά, βάθος, σοφία, λογική. Άκουσα στον Άγιο Πέτρο της Ρώμης το Ευαγγέλιο σε όλες τις γλώσσες. Η ελληνική αντίχησε άστρο λαμπερό μέσα στη νύχτα, θαύμασε ο Γκέτε. Η γλώσσα, εκτός από κώδικας επικοινωνίας και έκφραση, είναι και απεικόνιση της ανθρώπινης σκέψης. Τα χαρακτηριστικά της ελληνικής που προαναφέρθηκαν, αλλά και ο λεξικολογικός, ορθογραφικός και συντακτικός της πλούτος, δείχνουν το υψηλό επίπεδο του ελληνικού πνεύματος, ώστε να πλάσει λέξεις που να εκφράζουν με τόση ακρίβεια και καθαρότητα μεγάλες έννοιες και ιδέες, όλων των ειδών τα συναισθήματα, όλες τις αναζητήσεις της ανθρώπινης ψυχής. Κάτι που ενισχύεται από το ότι η δυνατότητα δημιουργίας νέων λέξεων είναι ανεξάντλητη. Δεν είναι λοιπόν παράξενο που μεγάλοι διανοητές την έχουν ονομάσει γλώσσα των θεών και μητέρα των γλωσσών. Επειδή γέννησε ένα λαμπρό πολιτισμό, θεμελίωσε το σύγχρονο, ευρωπαϊκό και παγκόσμιο και όρισε τον πανανθρώπινο αξιακό κώδικα. Η γλώσσα, αγαπητοί φίλοι, είναι και ταυτότητα. Η ελληνική γλώσσα είναι η ταυτότητά μας, η ρίζα μας, η άειλη πνευματική και πολιτιστική μας κληρονομιά, ο ακατάλητος δεσμός με την πατρίδα. Για τους Έλληνες της Διασποράς, τους ομογενείς μας, η ελληνική γλώσσα είναι ο άρρηκτος λόρος με τη μητέρα Ελλάδα. Είναι η ευχή της μάνας, το παραμύθι, η προσευχή, το μυρολόι, το ανούρισμα, η παροιμία, η λακωνική σοφία των προγόνων. Είναι η παρηγοριά, η κινητήριος δύναμη, η σανίδα σωτηρίας στις δυσκολίες και το εφαλτήριο για πρόοδο. Η γλώσσα είναι το μόνο που απομένει σε αυτόν που έχει φύγει από την πατρίδα του, αλλά είναι αλήθεια πως η γλώσσα τα περιέχει όλα, κατά τον Φον Χόφσταμαν. Και γι' αυτό στην ελληνική γραμματεία απόδημου ελληνισμού και δημόσιας διπλωματίας του Υπουργείου Εξωτερικών στηρίζουμε κάθε προσπάθεια που αφορά στην εκμάθηση των ελληνικών, στη διατήρηση και ενίσχυση ταυτότητας των αποδήμων μας, στην ανάδειξη της ελληνικής ως προμετωπίδας της ήπιας ισχύως της χώρας μας στο εξωτερικό και ως βασικού πλεονεκτήματος της πολιτιστικής μας διπλωματίας. Επειδή θέλουμε οι Έλληνες, όπου και αν βρίσκονται, να αισθάνονται πάντα κοντά στην πατρίδα. Θέλουμε τα παιδιά τους να γνωρίζουν τις ρίζες τους και το μοναδικό πλούτο που έχουν κληρονομήσει. Θέλουμε όσοι αγαπούν την Ελλάδα να μπορούν να μετέχουν της ελληνικής παιδείας. Θέλουμε το λαμπρό φως του ελληνικού πολιτισμού να μεταλαμπαδευτεί στις γενιές που θα έρθουν. Θέλουμε η πατρίδα μας να συνεχίσει να είναι ο φάρος των αξιών και της αγάπης για τον άνθρωπο σε όλο τον κόσμο. Σε όλους εσάς που συντελείτε με τις δράσεις σας και τον αγώνα σας, με την προσωπική σας προσπάθεια και την αγάπη σας, στη στήριξη και στη διάδοση της ελληνικής γλώσσας, ένα μεγάλο μπράβο και ένα ακόμα μεγαλύτερο εγκάρδιο ευχαριστώ. Χρόνια πολλά.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Theodoros Dimopoulos. I'm the Consul of Greece in Atlanta, and it is a real pleasure that we have gathered here today to discuss and give some perceptions and insights on the International Day of Greek Language, την Παγκόσμια ημέρα ελληνικής γλώσσας, 9 Φεβρουαρίου και ημέρα μνήμης του εθνικού μας ποιητή, του Διονυσίου Σολομού. Η ημέρα ελληνικής γλώσσας, όπως είπαμε, η μέρα αφιερωμένη στη μνήμη του εθνικού μας ποιητή, Διονυσίου Σολομού, ο οποίος έγραψε και τον εθνικό μας ύμνο και ανέδειξε τη ζωντανή γλώσσα του λαού σε έντεχνο ποιητικό λόγο. Η ελληνική είναι μία από τις ελάχιστες γλώσσες, ίσως η μοναδική, της οποίας η ύπαρξη είναι γνωστή εδώ και περίπου 3.500 χρόνια. Στα 3.500 χρόνια διαδρομής της, η ελληνική χαρακτηρίζεται από οργανική ενότητα και από αδιάλειπτη ιστορική συνέχεια. Από την Ομηρική εποχή μέχρι το δημοτικό τραγούδι και από το Πίνδαρο μέχρι το Σολομό, η ελληνική γλώσσα, παρά την κατά καιρούς τρικυμιώδη πορεία της και τους επιχειρούμενους αφανισμούς της, διατηρεί τη δομή και το μοναδικό λεξιλόγιό της. Πέραν λοιπόν της μοναδικής και μακραίωνης ιστορικής διαδρομής της, η ελληνική ξεχωρίζει πάνω απ' όλα για την επίδραση την οποία άσκησε στις ευρωπαϊκές γλώσσες, στις γλώσσες του δυτικού πολιτισμού, αλλά και στο σύνολο των επιστημών. Ιστοριογραφία, ιατρική, φιλοσοφία, μαθηματικά, γεωγραφία, ποίηση, θέατρο. Η επίδρασή της με το αλφάβητο, το λεξιλόγιο, το συντακτικό και την πνευματική γραμματιακή δημιουργία, τη λογοτεχνία της σε όλα τα είδη, ήταν και παραμένει μοναδική. Με μια ιστορική αναδρομή βλέπει κανείς ότι σαφώς υπήρξαν και άλλες ιστορικές γλώσσες, οποίες όμως είτε είναι σήμερα νεκρές είτε δεν άσκησαν σημαντική ή έστω ανάλογη επίδραση στο πολιτιστικό και επιστημονικό γίγνεσθε της ανθρωπότητας, όπως έκανε η ελληνική. Η ελληνική γλώσσα, σαν ένας ζωντανός οργανισμός και σαν στοιχείο της ταυτότητάς μας, εξελίσσεται. Όμως οι πυλώνες, οι βασικές δομές, το λεξιλόγιο, οι ρίζες, η ετυμολογία των λέξεων παραμένουν ίδιες. Σχηματίζουν ένα άρτιο οργανικό σύνολο με εξεπέραστη αντοχή, καταπληκτική ευελιξία, με ένα μοναδικό για τον άνθρωπο και την ιστορία πολιτισμικό φορτίο. Η ελληνική γλώσσα υπήρξε όχι μόνο το μέσο επικοινωνίας ενός έθνους, αλλά το όργανο διαμόρφωσης της παιδείας, η οποία βρίσκεται στον πυρήνα του ελληνικού πολιτισμού, από τη γέννησή του μέχρι την έως σήμερα εξέλιξή του. Η δύναμη, ο πλούτος της ελληνικής γλώσσας αποτέλεσε και στοιχείο συνοχής, ενότητας. Ως μέσο επικοινωνίας ήταν τέτοια η συνεκτική της δύναμη, ώστε η ελληνική γλώσσα, όπως προέκυψε από την σύνθεση των επιμέρους διαλέκτων της, ήταν εκείνη η οποία πρώτη συνέδεσε στενά και σε βάθος μεταξύ τους τα διάφορα ελληνικά φύλλα και οδήγησε στη μετέπειτα ενότητα όλων των Ελλήνων, το λεγόμενο ομόγλωσσο. Τα ομηρικά έπι, η Ιλιάδα και η Οδύσσεια, μάλλον είναι το κυριότερο πρώτο παράδειγμα μιας γλωσσικής και πολιτισμικής ενότητας του τότε ελληνικού κόσμου, γραμμένα σε μια ιδιαίτερη ελληνική γλώσσα προϊόν σύνθεσης διαφόρων συγγενών μεταξύ τους διαλέκτων, γραμμένο πάνω σε ιωνική βάση. Στη συνέχεια, κατά τους ελληνιστικούς χρόνους, η ελληνική μετασχηματίζεται και εξαπλώνεται. Απλοποιείται, η συνεκτική της δύναμη όμως παραμένει μοναδική, καθώς η βάση της ενότητας του ελληνιστικού κόσμου δεν είναι τόσο η κοινή καταγωγή, όσο η κοινότητα πολιτισμού, όπου κεντρική και αποφασιστική θέση κατέχει η ελληνική γλώσσα. Συναφώς η ελληνιστική κοινή θα αποτελέσει την πρώτη οικουμενική, πολιτιστική, φιλοσοφική, επιστημονική, πολιτική γλώσσα του κόσμου. Η ελληνική θα αποτελεί επίσημα γλώσσα των διανοουμένων, της διοίκησης, των ανωτέρων στρωμάτων, των πνευματικών παραγωγών, αλλά και τον γλωσσικό κορμό των ευρύτερων λαϊκών στρωμάτων, με τις ενσωματωμένες διαφοροποιήσεις διαλέκτων σε γεωγραφικές περιοχές για πολλούς αιώνες, από τη Ρωμαϊκή, τη Βυζαντινή, τη σύγχρονη εποχή, ενώ φυσικά θα αποτελέσει και συνεκτικό στοιχείο του νεοσύστατου ελληνικού κράτους. Η ελληνική γλώσσα και παιδεία, ο ελληνικός πολιτισμός εν γέννη, έχουν ως κορονίδα την ελευθερία της σκέψης, της διανόησης του ανθρώπου. Η ελληνική γλώσσα ως στοιχείο πολιτισμού είναι άρρηκτα συνδεδεμένη με τη δημοκρατία. Είναι η γλώσσα η οποία γέννησε τη λέξη και μεταλαμβάνευσε στον κόσμο τους όρους δημοκρατία και ελευθερία, δίνοντάς τους οικουμενικότητα. Τέλος, η κληρονομιά της ελληνικής γλώσσας παραμένει και σήμερα ζωντανή, συνδέοντας τη μητέρα πατρίδα με τον ελληνισμό της διασποράς, εγκυβωτίζοντας αξίες και πολιτισμικά στοιχεία. Χάρη στην ελληνική γλώσσα, την οποία τιμούμε σήμερα, έχουμε την ευκαιρία να συνεργαζόμαστε με το Κέντρο Ελληνικών Σπουδών στην Ατλάντα, τη Τζόρτζια, στη ΣΥΠΑ, με Έλληνες, αλλά κυρίως με ελληνιστές φιλέλληνες, οι οποίοι συμμετέχουν σήμερα σε αυτή τη διάλεξη, αποδεικνύοντας τη συνεκτική δύναμη και επιρροή της ελληνικής γλώσσας μέχρι και σήμερα.
Thank you, Theo, for starting us off. My name is Lou Ruprecht. I'm the director of the Center for Hellenic Studies at Georgia State University here in Atlanta. It's a great honor to be with you all today, both my panelists here and those who will be joining us later via Zoom. I'm especially grateful to the Consul for suggesting this gathering as a way of celebrating the very long and layered history of the Greek language. And it's the vast historical and geographical range of the Greek language that I would like to highlight in my remarks today. I approach the topic in this manner as one way to call attention to the Center for Hellenic Studies' interest in cosmopolitan Hellenism. The idea behind this phrase is simple, but I think the implications are quite profound. Greek matters, including the language, do not belong to any one geographical place or historical period. Constantine Cavafy's poetry celebrates that fact. Greek things are truly global in their reach and importance. Greek is thus an essential part of world heritage. This goes for the language as well as for the arts and culture. I'd like to dive into this history at an especially mesmerizing moment and place, the Bronze Age so-called Minoan period on the island of Crete. As many of you will know, 3 different writing systems were discovered by archaeologists on the island, matched by similar discoveries of what came to be known as Linear A and Linear B on the Greek mainland. Scholars tried for many years without success to decode these strange syllabaries. The breakthrough came when a talented amateur, Michael Ventris, decided to approach the material with a new working hypothesis, namely that Linear B was a writing system designed to depict spoken Greek. In other words, Ventris assumed that there was linguistic continuity across the Great Divide that archaeologists call the Greek Dark Ages, where we are simply in the dark about these people because they had lost the technology of writing. By assuming that the Linear B syllabary depicted a language similar to what Greeks spoke in the Homeric, Archaic, and Classical periods, Ventris managed his great breakthrough. He cracked the code and enabled us to read Bronze Age Greek documents as Greek. It was and remains a stunning achievement, and it highlights a very distinctive feature of the Greek language we just heard about, namely its linguistic continuity over a very long period of time. Now, the distinction I've made between spoken language, which always existed, and written language systems which come and go, is an important one for this period. People could write in the Bronze Age Aegean world. They lost that technology in the so-called Dark Ages. They later recovered the art of writing, but with a new alphabet they adopted from the Phoenicians, and with new symbols for vowels that were their own unique contribution. The Homeric poems are now believed to have been orally composed epics that circulated in various forms for centuries. They were written down in that new Phoenician Greek alphabet sometime around 750 BCE for the Iliad and 700 BCE for the Odyssey. The Homeric poems describe the lost Bronze Age civilizations from across the Great Divide of the Dark Ages. That is, they assert a continuity across the divide, and the poetry itself provides the bridge. Achilles and Odysseus and all the rest were remembered as ancestors, speaking their language and honoring their gods. Yet the Homeric poems are the product of a new Greek reality that they are at pains to describe. In the Iliad, Greeks from all over the Greek-speaking world engaged in a united military expedition. In the Odyssey, one of those heroes has a devil of a time getting home, and his vast explorations introduce him to the extent and the limits of that Greek world. In other words, these are poems about an emerging sense of pan-Mediterranean Greekness. The sanctuaries of Zeus at Olympia and of Apollo at Delphi were established in this same period. As pan-Hellenic, or all-Greek, religious sanctuaries, they institutionalized this same ideal. Any Greek from anywhere in the expansive Greek world could participate in the Olympic contests and could consult the oracle at Delphi. But how was being Greek defined? We don't exactly know, but two things seem obvious. You would need to speak Greek, and you would need to recognize Zeus and Apollo as gods. In other words, language and religion, then, were two of the primary features of a Greek identity. The world in which people spoke the Greek language and honored the Olympian gods expanded tremendously through the conquests of Alexander the Great, who died in the city of Babylon in 322 BCE. There's a famous story told about Alexander meeting one of the most dramatic and controversial philosophers of his day, Diogenes of Sinope, also known as the Cynic. Alexander told his fellow soldiers that if he had to be anyone other than himself, then he'd choose to be Diogenes. He went over to the older man who was dozing in the sun and asked him what he could give him in recognition of his wisdom and a general halo of coolness about him. Diogenes famously told Alexander, "You can get out of my light." In other words, he did not want or need anything from a king. It was Diogenes who invented the word we associate with the cosmopolitan ideal, cosmopolitis. My city is the world. He said this when someone asked him where he was from. Clearly, he was a man far less interested in where he was from than in where he was going. He could be at home anywhere and everywhere. That's the cosmopolitan idea. When modern people promote the cosmopolitan ideal, several questions arise. Are you really willing to say that where you are from doesn't matter? It certainly matters enormously to many peoples around the world today, African Americans and Indigenous Americans, to name just two, but certainly Greeks in the diaspora as well. Furthermore, when we say that we're citizens of the world, what language should such a citizen speak? Clearly, we cannot be a citizen who makes him or herself understood anywhere in the world. We need to have a language in common for that. You can see the problem here. It's actually imperialism. A language that claims to be universal is usually the language of empire. The lingua franca of the 19th century was French, much as English was in the 20th century, for the simple reason that France and Britain were global empires. The pervasiveness of the Spanish language in the Americas testifies to the breadth and extent of Spanish imperialism as well. Alexander the Great was also a conquering emperor, and in his wake, people from Macedonia to Afghanistan spoke a simplified version of Greek called Koine, or Common Greek. It was most people's second language, and it was the language of diplomacy almost everywhere. The question is thus whether the Greek language was something imposed upon people by Macedonian imperial interests, or whether people embraced the Greek language and culture for other reasons. A fascinating place in which to pursue this question is, appropriately enough, the Egyptian port city of Alexandria, founded by Alexander, named after him, and destined to be one of the jewels in the crown of Mediterranean Hellenism. There was a large and thriving Jewish community in Alexandria, as well as the famed library with its unparalleled collection of books. Within a century of that city's founding, Jewish scholars in Alexandria translated the Hebrew Bible into Greek in a version known as the Septuagint, because of a fable that 70 rabbis each translated the Bible separately and each created an identical version. The existence of the Septuagint suggests an answer to my earlier question, namely that many Hellenistic Jews in Egypt no longer read Hebrew. They needed their Bible translated into Greek so that they could read it and study it. That fact has another large implication for our topic today. it suggests that some Jews embraced Greek language and culture for reasons more profound than that an empire required them to do so. This mixture of Hebrew and Greek was to have remarkable religious implications. The Christian religion is the most obvious result of this mixture of Jewish and Greek, and all of its scriptures are also written in Koine Greek, what we today refer to as the New Testament or New Covenant in Greek. Another supreme example of the power of such linguistic and cultural mixing may be seen on the island of Crete again, a name which means the mixed place in Greek. During the long period of Venetian rule, the island experienced its own renaissance. Vincenzo Cornaros's epic, the Eratokritos, as well as the paintings of El Greco, are considered two of the high watermarks of the Cretan Renaissance. Their mixture of Byzantine and North Italian forms created a distinctive and enormously rich body of literary and visual imagery alike. When the Ottomans finally completed the conquest of Venetian Crete in 1669, Cretan refugees carried much of this poetic material with them, primarily to the islands of Zakynthos and Corfu. Corfu housed the first Ionian academy already in the first decade of the 1800s. And it was here that the first national Greek poet, Dionysius Solomon, who was born on Zakynthos in 1798 and later resided on Corfu until his death in 1857, would become a part of this remarkably long-lasting and remarkably versatile linguistic tradition, well embodied in the Greek national anthem, his hymn to liberty. And it is this rich legacy that we honor today. Thank you very much.
My name is Aikaterini Grigoriadou, and I'm a research fellow at the Center for Hellenic Studies at Georgia State University. As a native Greek and as a member of the Greek diaspora, I'm honored to participate in the celebration of the International Greek Language Day. Our contemporary perspective on the Greek language is that of a unified single language. However, this perspective belies a true diversity and richness of Greece's dialectical variations across time and space, both within the boundaries of the modern Greek state, as well as beyond them, in the larger realm that Greekness has impacted throughout the millennium. Today, I wish to bring to the fore the musical and verbal interplay between ancient and modern Greek within the musical ensemble Orphean Harmony. My goal is to show how the group's performances in ancient and modern Greek connects to the Orphean Harmony artists' notions of their own Greek identity and heritage. Although we do not know what ancient Greek music sounded like, we do have some clues based on surviving fragments relative to musical compositions, practices, techniques, and instruments that span roughly from the depths of the Homeric times to the Byzantine era. These fragments elaborate the diversity and richness that define Greece's musical and linguistic traditions throughout the centuries. In recent years, more attention has been paid to attempts to reconstruct these ancient sounds and experiences. For example, the musical ensembles Atrium Musicae de Madrid and Lirablos have offered the creative approaches to some of these fragments. Orphean Harmony is another musical group that takes a particular perspective on this process based on the scholarly musicological approach by M.L. West and the artist's unique orchestrations, compositions, and techniques. Since its establishment in Thessaloniki in 2007, Orphean Harmony has been reinventing ancient Greek music using modern reconstructions of ancient Greek instruments and costumes. Its repertoire includes surviving musical, lyrical, and theatrical excerpts from the 8th century before Common Era to the 3rd century Common Era. In these ways, the group connects aspects of the Homeric, Orphic, Delphic, Sapphic, Classical, Hellenistic, and Paleo-Christian worlds to the contemporary Greek audience. Along with the group's musical elements, ancient and modern Greek constitute a significant component of the group's performances in two further ways. The first is the artist singing in ancient Greek and reciting in modern Greek. The second is the artist's use of linguistic and vocal elements attributed to antiquity, such as particular greetings and blessings, along with modern Greek during the group's communications. Regarding the first point, the performers sing all the musical excerpts in ancient Greek, while they recite some of the lyrical and theatrical excerpts in modern Greek. This is, according to the group members, in order to connect better with the modern Greek audiences, as the ancient dialects are not widely intelligible to contemporary Greek speakers. The artists also do not necessarily understand the meaning of all the words in the ancient texts. This is particularly accentuated by the fact that these fragments belong to diverse eras and come from different parts of the Greek world, thus demonstrating significant dialectical variations. Nevertheless, even without full textual engagement, Orphean Harmony's performance report feeling a special connection to the ancient Greek language. I argue that this is their way of making sense of the paradox of the many Greeces that have historically existed and the promotion of a singular Greek identity that dominates national discourse. How then to create unity, harmony, and belonging out of this socio-politically present contradiction? Even if textually impenetrable, blending ancient and modern Greek creates a sensory and aesthetic resolution to this contradiction. As an Orphean Harmony member explains, quote, "Even though you may not always know exactly what it means, you do recognize it. Ancient and modern Greek share the same alphabet and sounds. So in a way, ancient Greek creates a sense of familiarity," unquote. When combined with the group's musical elements, this sense of familiarity is heightened, boosting further feelings of heritage and identity, which for Orphean Harmony artists cover a vast range of nationalistic, multicultural, and cosmopolitan interpretations. Nevertheless, as the artists perform within the group, they collectively experience and share feelings of cultural belonging. In the group's public performances, these feelings are transmitted to the audiences, which responds with enthusiastic applause, a sense of elation, and a soaring national pride. Regarding the second point, concerning the employment of ancient Greek greetings and blessings within the group's communications, the artists greet each other with the ancient Greek words "Ernst και ευδαιμονείτε," which translates roughly to be healthy and happy. They also toast with the words "Evi evan," which translates approximately to good health. These features suggest that the performers create their own speech community. In this community, the ancient Greek blends with the modern Greek, thereby establishing novel linguistic practices that forges the group's identity. To conclude, through music and speech, the interplay of ancient and modern Greek within Orphean Harmony stage performances celebrates the richness of the Greek language across time and space. It reinforces feelings of cultural belonging that transcend strict narratives of identity and heritage, and it contributes to new linguistic practices within and outside of the group. As a member of Orphean Harmony myself, I wish you all Happy International Greek Language Day and Ernst και ευδαιμονείτε.
Greetings, everyone, and happy International Greek Language Day. I am Kathryn Kozaitis, professor of anthropology at Georgia State University. My essay addresses the Greek language in ethnography across 3 speech communities. Attributed to Nelson Mandela is the following principle. If you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. If you talk to him in his own language, that goes to his heart. Mindful of asymmetrical relations of power between speakers, Mandela distinguishes Afrikaners' response to communication with others in English, the head, versus a connection to those who speak with them in Afrikaans, the heart. Ethnography requires both and then some. Shared figures of speech between ethnographers and their interlocutors, including metaphor, simile, idioms, and slang, illuminate the topic of ethnographic inquiry and honor our partner conversationalists. My ethnographers with speakers of Greek focus on 3 speech communities: elderly immigrants from Greece to Chicago, descendants of Roma refugees from Turkey to Athens, and native-born Greeks of Thessaloniki. Integral to the social identity of each group is the Greek language. Yet the Greek that unites each community consists of particular elements of speech and a shared set of linguistic norms. As Noam Chomsky and other social linguists have taught us, language embodies the speaker's history, traditions, and adaptations that constitute the speech community in time and space. Ethnography with elderly Greeks in Chicago in 1983 through 1985 required proficiency in Greeklish and Gringlish, a portmanteau of Greek and English words that reflected immigrants' varied points of entry to the US and levels of acculturation in mainstream American society. Of course, usage of the same words does not guarantee understanding. One must use the same words for the same genus of inward experience, notes Friedrich Nietzsche. Ultimately, one must have one's experience in common. Having lived among Greek immigrants in Detroit, I was well-versed in the code switching of these speakers. Familiar were elders' concerns about Yaramata, being old and Greek in America, expressed with such phrases as, "Thank you, honeymoon, for listening to my parapona. Είμαι lonesome χωρίς τα παιδιά." Indeed, physical and cultural distance from their children and grandchildren was a common lament. Stranded without transportation in the middle of the Windy City's winter, elders asked if I would drive them to the marketa for groceries in times of biloziria, below 0 temperatures, accompany them to the banga to cash a Social Security checky, and visit them at the spitalia, the hospital, should they become ill. References to the Greek language fostered these speakers' sense of a collective identity as upwardly mobile Americans of Greek descent. As a second-generation Greek-American man in his 80s declared, "Μια γλώσσα μας δένει," one language unites us, a sentiment that others also expressed with conviction. Greek figured prominently in my ethnography in 1987 through 1989 of the multilingual community of sedentary Roma of Athens. Ethnography with this linguistic minority required proficiency in the local dialect of Greek Romani, a hybrid language that combined mostly Greek words and phrases sprinkled with some Turkish expressions. Concerned with their status as a racialized and subordinated segment of Greek society, these Roma switched codes constantly and relied on Greek words to describe their public practices, including sports, shopping, politics, Orthodox church rites, and national holidays, in which they participated wholeheartedly. Ultimately, I learned their method of adding a Romani ending to a Greek verb to communicate with each other. For example, skorpisailam, we were scattered, gledisardas, gledisame, diavasarav, diavazo, and inponesarel, tenponese. We are objectively Greek, essentially Roma, asserted one informant to indicate that structural and symbolic boundaries between mainstream Greeks and the stigmatized Roma persisted. But, he argued, pointing to the community's sedentary status, Greece is now our country, and Greek is our language too. Ethnography with Greeks in Thessaloniki at the height of austerity required fluency in Demotic Greek, proficiency in vernacular speech, and familiarity with ancient Greek proverbs. My hosts pointed to the Greek language as their defining national attribute that transcends the geography of Greece. To emphasize the international value of Greek, study participants pointed me often to Xenophon Zalotas's 2 speeches in English written in Greek words only. And in an email to me in 2012, one interlocutor included the link to Pantelis Thalassinos' Glossolalia, an ode to Glossolalia Ελληνική της οικουμένης θάμα, he boasted. Notable is the extent to which middle-class Thessalonikians relied on ancient Greek aphorisms to cope with, interpret, and navigate the debt crisis. A few examples are in order. Pathi mathos, insisted those who saw lessons in the suffering. Many consoled one another with ουδέν κακόν αμυγές καλού, to emphasize the potential, if not inherent, benefits in the financial catastrophe. A young scholar of German reflected, πάντα ρει και ουδέν μένει. Everything flows. This crisis too will pass. Finding comfort in hope, finding comfort in hope, a retiree pondered, τι κοινότατον, ελπίς, και γάρις άλλο μηδέν, αυτή παρέστη. Hope comforts us and mobilizes grassroots renewal, he concluded. Resilience, personal and cultural malleability, promised resourceful adaptations for all participants. Ανάγκαδου δε θεοί μάχονται, noted a senior accountant. Circumstances necessitate that we change our mindset and our practices to recover from this calamity. Indeed, no other sentiment than resilience characterized more Thessalonikians' collective response to the crisis. And από μηχανής Θεός, God from the machine, asserted an international businessman, confident that resolution of this Greek tragedy was inevitable. In lengthy narratives of crisis, Thessalonikians across gender and age demonstrated that the Greek language as an international asset represented a key weapon with which to defend against Troika's imposed structural austerity, what many viewed as yet another occupation by a foreign power that threatened them and their nation state. Each speech community featured here demonstrates linguistic competence, speakers' ability to invent and to create language by producing varieties of linguistic forms. They unify them and through which they confront and imbue their daily life with meaning. For Chicago's elderly immigrants, Greeklish and Gringlish is a language of nostalgia, an affirmation of cultural ties with Greece, their primordial homeland. The Roma of Athens embrace Greek as a language of belonging, the mechanism that facilitates their social integration in Greece, their adopted homeland. As for the Greeks of Thessaloniki, the Greek language in all its variations is a language of sovereignty, a source of personal pride, national integrity, and global renown, the language of their only homeland. Communication with and connection to the people in whose life we immerse ourselves as ethnographers and as friends rely not only on a common formal language, the head, but on its localized and temporal usage, function, and meaning, the heart. The subsets that emerge from the Greek language do not damage the integrity of the mother tongue, nor should they compromise the dignity of their speakers. Rather, such linguistic variants facilitate and proliferate connections among members of diverse speech communities within Greece and beyond. As my work illustrates, ethnography in the Greek language valorizes its variations as much as it ennobles its speakers.
Hello, I am very happy to participate in this celebration of the Greek language, and I'm going to focus on an aspect of modern Greek that perhaps doesn't get as much attention as it deserves. This is the use of dialect, and in particular the dialect or dialects of the island of Crete, where I have done research since 1974. The particular aspect of dialect that I'm going to talk about is the poetic form known as the mandinada. The word appears to be of Venetian derivation. The mattinata, the morning song, is what follows the serenata, the serenade to one's beloved. When she doesn't appear on the balcony, I suppose you just go on in the morning. In any case, this is a form that has been preserved in the Cretan countryside, and it's also its impact on local literature is very strong, especially in the Venetian period. We see the 15 syllable line, the Pentasyllabos Rikos, actually not quite in Mandinada form because it doesn't always rhyme, but in some of the poetic output of that period, like the Eratokritos, one sometimes has the feeling that this is very much like a series of Mandinades. The Mandinada form is not confined only to Crete. We find it in Cyprus under the name of Chatista. We find it in the Dodecanese and elsewhere, but Crete is famous for it, and it continues to flourish, although now in sadly a rather fading way. And I think that its slow defeat is the result of three factors. One is that because it is socially embedded, people use it to talk about things that are very immediate and in the values of their own community. Some of the ways that they talk involve scatological or sexual references that offend bourgeois sensibilities. And very often, in fact, the folklorists would edit various kinds of folk songs, including Mandinades, to remove those kinds of allusions. Indeed, the second factor is folklorization. The folklorists did an important task in preserving many songs, but they also took it upon themselves to edit them in ways that did not represent local sensibilities in some cases. And this folklorization also had the effect of rendering this poetic form as something rather static. In fact, people began more and more then to learn their Mandinades from books and periodicals, rather than simply trying to be inventive and make them up as they go along in a social context. And another dimension of this is that people are no longer as skilled, perhaps, as they once were at moving between a number of different registers. Before the restoration of democracy in 1974, you had to know Katharevousa, purist Greek, in order to get access to legal and economic resources. Villagers could sometimes mock Katharevousa in their Mandinades, and certainly they could mock the pseudo-Katharevousa diction of certain kinds of people. But at the same time, they could also switch around in the dialect, not only in the Mandinades, also when they told stories about their exploits, for example, when going on raids against the flocks of people in other villages, they would play with the syntax of the local language in ways that would, for example, associate the active voice with the agential male and the passive voice with the feminized object of male competition. I've described a lot of that in my book, The Poetics of Manhood. With the fading of the Mandinada, sadly, I think we also see a fading of the dialect itself, in part because the Mandinada is a vehicle for that particular kind of language. Along with the language, something else that is fading is the tendency to have very long celebrations. Weddings used to be 3-day affairs. Now they're still pretty long. They're 1-day affairs. But there is a reduction in the spontaneity and in the options for getting up and singing these Mandinades, especially when you have an electrified set of musical instruments blaring out while the singer has a microphone and dominates the proceedings in such a way that it's much harder for individual villagers to get up and add their own Mandinades. The Mandinada is a strikingly conventional form. It has, as I said earlier, the 15-syllable structure, but it also uses rhyme or at least assonance. Its conventionality, of course, is precisely what then allows a clever singer or speaker, because there is a spoken version, to play with those conventions. If you're too conventional in the Mandinada that you sing, you are likely to get this response. Si Mandinades apules tsixeri jajamu, ma chines apuleo ago inaptatsothikamu. The Mandinades that you say, my grandmother knew those, but the ones that I'm saying come right out of my guts. And this is a way of mocking the fact that the person you're responding to didn't manage to rise above banal conventionality in his or her own Mandinades. It's really important to understand the social context of these things. So I'm going to go give you now an actual example from Sonyana about a young man who went to the nearby village of Voriza, where he was being teased and told that he really had to marry a young woman from Voriza, to get married in Voriza. And finally, he more or less blew up at the audience and sang Kalyahona metapsunes, stiasvendias tiriza, parana paro kopelya, nane putavoriza. I would rather be buried at the root of the asphodel than that I should take a girl, marry a girl from Voriza. Now you notice that the first line is very ornate, but it's actually very conventional. And at this point, an elderly woman, a grandmother, standing at the far side, away from the center where the young man was being teased, so spatially as well as social structurally, she was presenting herself as the exact opposite of this guy, then takes his Mandinada and turns it on his head as follows. Kalyahona metapsune semia shiroskatula paranaparis kopelya nanevorizupula. I would rather be buried in a puddle of pig shit than that you should marry a girl from Voriza. Now, again, one can see how that scatological allusion might offend the bourgeois sensibilities, not only of Athenians, but of urban Cretans as well. One could, of course, bowdlerize it, and instead of having the shiroskatula, would say shirotitrifula, in the hole made by the pig. But I don't think we should be doing that. As an anthropologist, I am committed to respecting the values of local people and trying to understand their cultural universe in their own terms. This was not something shocking to them. This was indeed an extraordinarily clever way by which the elderly lady was able to make fun of the stiff formality of the young man who clearly, in her eyes, wasn't really very good at singing Mandinades. Now, one of the dimensions of the Mandinada form is that it's well suited both to Standard Greek and to some of the specific features of the Cretan dialect, and particularly of local variants of the Cretan dialect, because actually it's not one dialect, that every village has its own variant, pretty much. And so I decided I would take it on myself for this occasion to invent a Mandinada that could be done both ways. So the first version is recognizably, can be partly Cretan, doesn't have to be. I'll do it in Standard Greek. Then the second one, what you will see is a reversal of word order that represents an actual syntactical shift between Standard Greek and Cretan dialect. So the first version goes like this. Tis Mandinades homorphes, pote tatis pume, tus filus na glindisume, και αυτούς να τους χαρούμε. Or I could make it a little more Cretan by saying, τσι Mandinades έμορφες, πότε θα τσιπούμε, πότε θε να τσιπούμε, τσι φίλους να γλυντήσουμε, και αυτούς να τσιγλυντούμε. But it still has those standard Demotic Greek verbs. Now listen to this version. I should translate first. When will we say these beautiful Mandinades to celebrate our friends and to enjoy their presence, to enjoy them? And here is the more obviously Cretan version of the same thing. Simandinades gemorphes, pote na pumenetsi, si filus na glindisumene, or na glindumene, si na charumenetsi. So you see that reversal of the pronoun and verb, which is actually quite typical of the way people speak when they're using the local dialect. The fact is you have a choice. You have a choice right there. The conventionality of the form thus provides a structure against which the inventiveness of skilled singers and sometimes speakers, as an idiom called militontas, you can say mandinades, can be demonstrated. It's very hard to translate them into English. I once showed some translations of mine to the late Kimon Fryer. He wasn't very complimentary about them, and he said the problem is it's very difficult to do anything other than turn them into doggerel. I'll give you one of my better examples just to show you what I think he meant. So here's the Greek. Piga geproschinisa. This is actually from another part from further west on the island. Piga geproschinisa senerimuklisi. I went and prayed on bended knee. No, sorry, I went to a mountain church. I found my way and prayed on bended knee, and I beheld the mother of Christ, and she shed tears for me. Now, I don't think that's too much like doggerel, but it doesn't have that inspirational quality, certainly, I think, of the original. And it doesn't have the capacity in English to carry deep emotion, which is very often a feature of the mandinada, which can range from pure irony to extreme depths of despair, of love, of deeply felt emotions. The English doggerel form doesn't do that justice, at least not in any form I was able to give it. But it does at least suggest that conventionality that is, in the end, what allows the more inventive singers to display their talents. Well, as I draw these remarks to a close, I want to thank Lou Ruprecht for creating this occasion and bringing us together, because talking about the Greek language among ourselves like this gives us a sense of its extraordinary versatility. Of course, all languages are versatility, but this is a language that has a very long written history. It also has a very rich oral history, and that oral history has tended to get swallowed up because the literati, the folklorists and others, especially when driven by more old-fashioned right-wing nationalist instincts, have tended to suppress some of the more amusing, but also more revealing dimensions of the mandinada form. And in so doing, they have hidden away the dexterity with which these singers and speakers actually manage the language. The language for them is an instrument to be used with the sort of loving care that it also then expresses. And to express my appreciation to Lou, I want to end with a mandinada that I created for him. Ta pluti abuthorumene, majanda ine tosa, ine apis proerchunde, when blutis meni glossa. The riches that we are seeing here, why are there so many of them? It's because they come from an enriched tongue. And by that I mean, of course, the Greek tongue, but I'm also making a double reference to the fact that Lou Ruprecht has created the inspiration of this occasion, bringing us together and seeing just a few of the many ways in which the Greek language, throughout its history, has sparkled with life and has given us, I think, a great deal to think about in terms of the kinds of verbal dexterity of which perhaps we wouldn't approve in our own society. We have to appreciate it on its own terms, on the terms of these people who produce this kind of language and use it with, as I say, such extraordinary skill. Thank you very much.
So I want to thank all of our speakers for these really rich and nuanced presentations. I was going to invite the Consul to say a last word if you would like to round out our presentations, but thank you, everyone.
Oh, thank you. I would like to thank you from my part as well. It is really great, and our presentations today show, your presentations today show how multidimensional Greek language is. I mean, we all spoke about different dimensions on the same topic, covering the very multifaceted aspects of Greek language, from ethnography to music to history to language evolution. It is really great, and it is also remarkable how appealing the Greek language remains for scholars up until this day, given the fact that, as you mentioned also, Lou, I mean, the Greek language was not a lingua franca of the 18th century or the 19th century, because Greece was not an empire at that time. So, but it was still very appealing, and during the Renaissance and and for all scholars around all big academic institutions, it is a must. It is a staple. So I'm really happy that I had the chance to cooperate with you in this event. I hope that we will repeat it and that we will enrich it next time. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your assistance and your contribution.